Thanks to Cesar, Lauren and Christine, and we'll now invite our panelists up for a conversation. There we go. So I'll introduce everyone. We have Jonas on the end, Jonas Yanomagi from the Interactive Advertising Bureau. He's been working with them since 2017. And prior to that was head of media strategy and operations and head of media at REA Group. His digital career began in a startup in 1999 and then went on to found WebAds UK, a specialist business and financial digital sales house, and then moved to High Media, Europe's largest independent ad network, with access to almost more than 150 million unique users. He's been in Australia since 2012. Welcome, Jonas. And Charmaine Griffiths. Here next to me is the Growth Director for Australia and New Zealand at VML-YMR, a global marketing, communication and advertising company with a rich history stretching back to the 1920s. I think that's right, isn't it? Yeah. Australia's oldest ad agency, yeah. Charmaine has over 9 years of experience spanning creative, media and consulting sectors, and as Growth Director focuses on identifying and unlocking new business opportunities in a fast-paced landscape of media and entertainment. Just down the end here is Richard Warwick, Head of Digital and Partner at Custom Media, a Sydney-based independent media agency, and Richard has worked in digital advertising for over 10 years, helping a diverse range of organisations develop effective advertising strategies, execute and measure success across digital channels. And Jean Burgess, the Associate Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society, here with us as well on the panel. So I wanted to start off by saying we're quite familiar, I think, in a general sense with this idea that digital platforms collect our data and they use that data to target ads. But I wanted to ask each of you who've been working in the industry over the last decade or more, how has this story developed and changed? And particularly, what do you see as the crucial developments or the crucial moments of change in recent history? I'd like to go first. Get us underway. Richard. Thank you. Yeah, we're on.
Sorry, just muted it.
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. So look, from my perspective, I think there's been a tremendous amount of change over the last 5 years, and I expect that change to continue for at least the next 3 or 4 years. There's obviously been big adjustments in terms of the landscape, locally and internationally, and things like changes to privacy laws, which we know are imminent, are also going to have a big factor in terms of the types of campaigns that we run and how we run them. But from my perspective, one of the biggest changes has probably been a shift from a performance mentality amongst a lot of advertisers to more, I guess, old-fashioned brand marketing, and to not be so reliant on things that you can measure easily through digital platforms, and move back towards more holistic measures of success, so business growth and overall sales and things like that. And I think how that relates to the work that you're doing is probably a lot of the systems that platforms such as Meta and Alphabet have set up, is they're going to need to change to be less specific in how they target people, and be much more general in terms of that approach. And as advertisers, probably to be a bit more bit less obsessed with, I want to be really targeted about who I'm reaching, and I want to send this specific message to this person, and instead go back to thinking about broad groups of population and how we're going to reach them and message them.
And would you say it's driven by two things? One is the changes in the privacy landscape, but also advertisers were measuring really specific things because platforms were letting them, and now they're reflecting on that and saying, wait a second, what's the value of it?
Absolutely. It doesn't work. Right. So that performance mentality it has been bad. It's gone down a path where instead of actually thinking about what ads we're showing people and how people might respond to that, it's, well, if the system tells us that we're getting one person clicking on it, a click is a good thing, therefore we'll try and get more of those. And it leads to these kind of perverse outcomes where you're showing ads to people based on their probability to click on it, which a probability to click isn't a level of engagement or interest that has a positive business benefit. So I think it's marketers waking up to that, and I think those of us in the industry have been trying for a long time to move them back, back towards the light in terms of where you should be spending your money. The other factor is on the commercial side is consumption across traditional channels is going down, as people know, but there's still big advertising budgets that need to go somewhere. So a lot of money that used to go into things like TV is now going towards digital, and advertisers want the same outcomes they used to get from TV in digital environments. So platforms, if they want to get some of that money, they have to offer solutions that are more similar to what advertisers were getting from TV. And I think platforms are getting smarter about, hey, it's not, we don't get growth through being increasingly targeted, we get growth through scale. So we need to be able to provide impactful messages at scale to advertisers.
Yeah. Charmaine? Oh, no, it's on.
I've muted myself.
Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said. There used to be a very tired joke in a lot of the agencies that I worked in that, oh, I just wish we could go back to when the Australian Woman's Weekly reached 1 million people and you could just buy that one ad and reach 1 million people. So the game that we've always been in is reach. We wish that it was easier. We wish that we could buy one TV ad and, you know, still reach a couple of million Australians. I think we all got very excited there on, you know, the industry is built on art and science, on the science side of it. We all got very excited for a number of years of, you know, hyper targeting. But really, when you come back to it, reach is what we need to do. And I think that the balance of, you know, traditional channels losing the volume of people that you need to be effective at scale, digital platforms starting to scale up has seen something very interesting on the art side of the industry. So often there was a consideration that, you know, a TV screen was a greater canvas or a more impactful canvas, or a canvas that you'd be excited to show your mum that you had, you know, made an amazing ad for. And then social media, because it was dark, it wasn't reaching a lot of people, was not something that, you know, creatives were really drawn to. I think that I always talked about it as sort of horizontal creatives and vertical creatives, and there was a real distinction in the industry for a long time. I think we're finally at a point now where the vertical creatives are seen as prestigious and impactful as your horizontal creatives as well. So we've always been in the game of reach. It's just now that getting that reach and getting that scale and kind of playing in the dark arts of digital and what you can do there is a lot more sophisticated and nuanced.
Yeah, but this has been part of an evolutionary process, I think, based upon the capabilities driven by the benefits of programmatic in particular as a mechanism to be more efficient and effective, to integrate data of all types, shapes and sizes into what you're doing, to have more controls for both buyers and sellers. I mean, I think you need to look back a little bit to see how we've reached this point, because the obsession and the kind of overreach that we've had with audience data in particular is, it feels a little sinful, but it's actually a natural progression because of the capabilities that existed. I have a specific, distinct memory myself at around 2010 when representing, I'd like to think, some fairly significant premium audiences and inventory, and understanding that buyers through demand side platforms, buying technologies, and the data integrations available therein had a greater understanding of the audiences I was supposed to be representing and providing. So it was kind of natural that there was going to be a bit of an obsession of just trying to find that that individual with that level of intent for a particular product anywhere on the internet without going back to that sort of premium curated audience piece, which was so prevalent, particularly in the sort of mid-noughties. So yeah, yes, we've had to learn from that, and we're sort of growing up and maturing as an industry as a result. But I think there's some reason for that, and we've learned a lot from it. The topics that I think are coming as a result are in relation to transparency, which was a big topic for particularly brands that pushed it in terms of understanding who they're dealing with, why buys are being constructed in a certain way, who's taking a clip of the ticket, and that is a topic that resonates still now. There's a global effort from the ANA report that came out only about a month ago, I think, that like they're still looking at it. There's still an element of murkiness in some quarters. I personally believe the ability to show transparent paths and the standards underpinned by the likes of the IAB do exist. that commitment can be there. The declaration to sort of declare yourself as a participant within programmatic campaigns is possible. You can see all the hops all the way through. So, and actually, to Christine's point on sustainability, that's something that's going to take transparency to the next level, because brands have an expectation that the Scope 3 emissions of their partners with whom they work with need to be as minimized and as measurable actually as possible. So that's a topic that's coming. Bits of the industry are running at different speeds, but therefore you need to know who's involved, and you need to be able to pass those emission signals through all the transactions and measure it consistently. And that's a very interesting development that we're currently seeing. And just to mention the point made earlier around that sort of linear TV experience, the change in consumer experiences, because it's incredible, because the way in which you have addressable televisions in your home and you can deliver the benefits of linear TV and the controls and capabilities of programmatic has had a real shift recently that I think there is a bit of a comeback in terms of that branding and attention and engagement. That's very true. And audio's come of age. That is happening, and it's wonderful to see. And even out of home, big digital addressable screens. Whilst the footfall's slightly inferred, you're still being able to have more controls over the opportunities that you're providing to consumers on those screens. So it's quite an interesting point that we've come to. But I think there's something in the history of how we got here that's important to remember.
Can I think it's really interesting, this idea that this hyper-targeted moment is, to be blunt, sort of over, and we're moving into another moment. And I was thinking a little bit this year, the way Meta's ad interface shifted away from, like a decade ago, you would log into the ad creator as a small business, and you get, you'd have to say, I want these people of this age with this interest. Like it led you to think in a hyper-targeted way. But this year they've kind of dropped all that language, and the ad creator really just uses the language of lookalikes. And so I just wanted to ask this question about, what does, in this moment, audience optimization, refining, creating the right kind of audiences for advertisers look like now? What kind of data matters? What does it mean to optimize an audience over time? Maybe if I come back to you, Richard.
Yeah, sure. I think it's certainly less prescriptive than it used to be. So at the moment, it's much more, I guess, broader. So if we use Facebook as an example, that was like the plaything that after what I guess was 2015, or the Trump campaign essentially killed that for everyone, because they were too targeted, they ran too many ads, and Facebook had a lot of pressure to say you can't let people run campaigns like this. Yeah. And so the shift has been away from, okay, we need 1 million different ads for 1 million different potential audiences, to being much more general. Now, the issue that I guess we have, and one of the issues that you're looking into, is if we're being less prescriptive, we don't understand those audiences as well as we used to, because at least we would go, okay, we're really confident we're reaching this type of person, and this message is appropriate for that type of person. So say, men 18 to 34 that like cars, for instance. Whereas they're moving to things like lookalike audiences, where the idea is you would give Facebook your data in terms of, here's all these people that are our customers, or we know are really hot prospects for us, and you can go out and model and find those, and we don't really need to understand who you're going after. And that's bad for media buyers, obviously, because we want to understand who that is, because we don't want to be reliant on Facebook all the time to find that audience, and we want to be able to build on it and spread that out across other platforms and environments as well. So I'd say that's sort of where we are at the moment, and the way the place we're heading is more and more obscurity, and so that's something that I think is going to be an issue, and probably something that will be a focus of your work moving forward.
Right.
Just want to jump in. Sorry. So the capabilities of hyper targeting within certain environments are, in my opinion, as rich as ever. It's just that companies are more responsible and mature, particularly the massive tech companies, because it's all previously by design now. So there is a perception piece there, And there is a little bit of, if I'm allowed to say it, sort of dumbing down of the process. If you look at Google's Performance Max product, it's kind of a hit the button, it's going to get better, but you don't actually know how. The other point is signal loss. So signal loss has been happening for a while. Apple, iOS, huge limitations there. Safari has always been the case. Mozilla, Firefox has pretty much always been the case. And then you've got the third-party cookie changes to come. It's pretty much confirmed that Chrome will make that decision in H2, sometime in H2 24 calendar year. So that's to come, and that's another reason that you simply can't attribute as accurately. So it's a reason for you not to be too performance adverse, because you just don't know. It's going to be sort of very cohort based. So just bear that in mind, because that's such a huge change that's coming.
Charmaine, on this question of audience building?
This is quite a boring one, but often the actual answers are a little bit boring. So if you think about the operational cost, so let's take ourselves back to the glory days of 15 years ago, when you did one big television commercial, you did a bit of newspaper or magazines, a much simpler time. But if you think about the actual art of that, so how many ad formats there were, how many things you actually had to produce for a campaign, it was quite small. Then we went through what I call the matching luggage phase, which is you would start with the TV commercial, and then all of the other different ad formats and platforms that had come online, you would match that, or sort of take the distinctive assets or the art that you've created for the TVC and flow that out across all of the other different platforms. We've now evolved into this new moment where we're not starting with the TV commercial first, because it's not the one that necessarily actually has the greatest reach anymore. So you're creating kind of a overarching look and feel, and then deploying that specifically against the main kind of platforms or formats that you need. So if you do that, so say we've got 4 or 5 different, articulations of the idea, that's still more than you were doing 10, 15 years ago. If you then go down to the next level and decide, okay, of those 4 or 5, I'm now going to do extremely hyper-targeted versions of this, the operational cost to do that versus the effectiveness of what the advertiser gets back, it's really negligible, and starts eating into your media dollars to get the reach that you need. Again, we're in the game of reach. So that's, it's a slightly boring answer, but it's sort of an operational cost that comes to it, which is why I think you find with these kind of bottom-up performance ad formats that are kind of pulling the creative together, I kind of call it like the Cluedo creative. It's this distinctive asset, Mrs. White in the drawing room with the gun. It's sort of this mega mix of all of the different distinctive assets coming together, because for humans in an agency pulling that volume of creative together, it's not a particularly it's a laborious task, and something that creatives and artistic people don't get a lot of impact out of, and I don't think advertisers are getting the impact out of it either.
Right. Please use your Slido to post questions, because we will go to questions soon. But I want to shift gears a little bit here and ask the question about generative AI and where it fits into this mix. If we're in one sense going more back to more mass broadcast kinds of creative and audience building, and generative AI suggests a moment of now automating and customizing the content. How do you see generative AI being kind of integrated into the ad world over the coming years? I'd like to, Jonas? Yeah.
I don't. Would you like to say something?
You would. Yes.
Well,
I'm going to come to Eugene. Yeah. No, you should. Yes.
Oh, I was going to sit back and listen, and but no, I've got the microphone now. It's okay.
We won't have time for questions.
I was going to on the audience, but what audience are you buying as a product? Well, as an audience, we don't know how we're being bought either. And then I was going to wait till after the generative AI thing to ask this, but there's this broad question about responsible AI going on. It involves things like explainability. It involves things like non-biased, non-predatory actions by automated systems. All things that brands care about. You've got the idea of brand safety, just in terms of ads being placed next to problematic content. We can leave aside the definition of problematic. So it strikes me that in our work that can be quite critical of the advertising industry, we have some shared interests in terms of building tools for just understanding what's going on. So I was gonna, I don't know if maybe you want to fold that into some of your answers.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll just take over, Gene. You ask the questions, right? We'll answer it. Hooray! There's a bit of a rebellious panel. So the core. I mean, I'll hopefully we'll get to that point. But the core point of productivity with AI generally, and I don't know if you've personally. I'm loud enough just to keep going. I don't know if you've personally.
Yeah, the Zoom people. Yeah, it's on. It's on though. It's on. You've turned it off.
Hello. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, I know. Yeah, I've only done this 400 times. Anyway, so look, from a productivity perspective, any of you out there that have played around with some of the tools, I highly recommend that you do. It's a fascinating time.
I would say many in this room have played.
Well, let's hope so. Get stuck in, get your hands dirty, because it's a fascinating time just to stand back and watch big tech go at it with a number of enormous players actually delivering and underpinning the capabilities that have been generated. It sounds like you know about it very well. And the philosophical approach to sort of centralization versus decentralization, which has forever been a thing across the internet. I think it's just fantastic. But in terms of productivity, I can only think, particularly with my old AdOps head on, that I just want people to do what humans should be doing and not spend 2/3 of their time creating the insights, but actually utilizing, analyzing, and leveraging the insights that are possible. And that's something that's so exciting from a productivity perspective. You can kind of scale through repetition and delegation and just have people doing what they ought to be doing. And whilst there's a fear in terms of skills, if I'm honest, in our industry, particularly at the sort of more operational and programmatic roles, that's something that people have had to be evolving throughout their time to exist. You're going to have to do different roles. You're going to have to upskill. You had to have a learning mindset, and I can only see that as being positive. However, in terms of how brands and industry leverages this, there is precedence of this going both right and wrong. So you mentioned sort of automated content. That problem existed in a big way about 10 years ago with a company called Demand Media that could knock out automated pages of content, text-based, before the search algorithms caught up, and they made a lot of money out of it, and it was pretty much non-human generated. So that's something that's only going to get worse if that mediocre kind of cookie cutter approach is taking place in terms of content, let alone the ads that you're experiencing that can be automated to such an extent and then optimized to the nth degree. It's going to be very hard to manage the quality of that, whilst it's great to embrace the benefits of automation. And with ad fraud, we've just produced a handbook on it. That's another issue altogether, because it's an arms race in which I only feel that these capabilities will be more of a problem than part of the solution.
Charmaine or Richard, on either this question of generative AI and or responsible AI? Responsible, explainable, observable? Yeah. What have we done to it?
Just testing. See, test and learn is what we live by. I think we're going to see a lot of really bad ads in the short term, and I know this would be concerning Charmaine particularly, but generative AI is going to produce terrible ads for a long time. So in the short term, I see that being the biggest problem. I work with a lot of data analysis tools that have built-in, machine learning and AI insights, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have some exposure to that as well. And you'd be really comfortable in your jobs because you've seen how poor the level of insight those tools provide. So from a practitioner standpoint, I'm not seeing anything yet which is going to change dramatically over the next few years in terms of, unless the level of insight that these tools can provide improves dramatically, it's going to be business as usual with maybe some efficiencies in terms of how we work and how we do things. I think it will be bad if we hand over too much of the creative reins to generative AI techniques. One example, I think one of the things presented earlier was talking around using generative AI to basically not pay a model to model clothes for Levi's, and that's you know, brands going out there wanting to talk about diversity and representation, but using AI as a shortcut for that is
Right.
quite, yeah, it's problematic. So I think we need to be holding marketers and brands to account for that kind of thing, because they don't get it if they're trying to use those solutions to address that problem. So yeah, it's probably a bit of a minefield.
Charmaine?
As someone who has the great pleasure of working with, you know, some of the best talent in the industry, me using ChatGPT doesn't make me a copywriter, and I think, you know, me or someone like me or a lookalike of me doesn't you know, make someone a great ad creator. I think what I'm really excited about is a couple of examples of amazing creatives using CGI and generative AI to create phenomenal, creatively impactful ads. There's two examples recently. One was it's gone viral in the last week of Maybelline, so for a mascara brand, and the creatives used icons around London, and they added sort of, you know, comically large eyelashes onto all of these icons, and had large installations of their mascara adding, you know, lashes onto the London Tube, etc. What's interesting about that is they actually used out of home, which is, you know, a creatively sort of impactful thing that we love to use as creatives as well, but did it in a CGI and a generative sort of way. Another one was the French fashion house Jacquemus, who took their micro mini bags and blew them up to sort of the scale of a car, and had them, you know, going all around Paris and all around these different sort of iconic places. So those two examples, I go, that is so creatively impactful. That is amazing for the brand. You can just imagine the creators back at the agency being like, you know, it would have cost us $3 million to make this, but we've made it with generative CGI and AI as well. So I think that there is amazing ways that you can harness these tools once you get industry leading, incredible people working on them at that top of the funnel level. But otherwise it's going to be, as I said before, a lot of Cluedo ads. You'll start to see them, you know, where it is just those distinctive assets being kind of moved in and out. But in the right hands, just in the way that Photoshop and ad tech has, you know, helped and enhanced the creativity as a tool, I think in the right hands, you can make incredibly creatively impactful things with this in the right way.
Can I go? Because we're going to run out of time, so I want to kind of focus our attention on this one big important question, and then go to some of the questions coming in from the audience. But to kind of pick up on Jean's question about, you know, we've been trying to build this ad observatory because we have this question about how to make digital advertising more observable, more explainable. And I think, as Jean pointed out, we share some interests here in that, you know, we have our reasons why we want advertising more explainable and observable, but advertisers and the ad industry in general wants that too, because you've found platforms to be opaque. And Richard, you've talked a little bit about that this morning already. So I wanted to ask you, you know, what kinds of explainability do you think are really important for the industry and the public? And if you were building an ad observatory that was kind of fit for purpose over the next 10 years, like what's the killer feature, or what's the killer aspect that it needs? Just so I'll ask you to make your kind of sharp answer to that, so I can go to some of these questions.
Okay. Yeah. So I think in that one, if you look at the study presented by Lauren, it'd be interesting to see that you have I was interested to see if there was all of the actions of the users included in there, in terms of what had actually been viewed, what the clicks looked like, what any post-purchase, and all of that. I think if you could, I was just wondering if it was beyond delivery. You know, that was one thing to consider. And ultimately, with the changes that are coming and the privacy proposals that have been mentioned around consumer privacy, that you have to weave the concept of consent into that. And I'd love there to be an industry-led discussion with government around how we can manage the informing consumers and empowering them, and then adhering to any of their consent preferences in a consistent, persistent, and responsible way throughout their internet experiences here in Australia, so that we can just do a lot better than what we've seen in Europe and in parts of the US to really sort of drive forward a better environment for advertising generally in digital. I'd love that to be part of the experimentation.
Cool. Yep. Richard, yeah.
I would say scale and spend. So I think greater visibility on how much is being spent on what, and I guess as a consumer, understanding how much is being spent to how much you're worth to a platform or an advertiser would be really interesting.
Jean, do you want to answer this question too?
Well, from some of our research on the explainability tools that are offered to consumers by Meta, such as the "Why am I seeing this ad" thing, which many people probably don't know exists, many consumers aren't interested in. We've just been really struck by how very limited it is to only have an individual and time-bound view of why a particular ad has been served to you, and it seems to me that connects really well. Whereas, so you'll never know if you tend to receive a lot of ads that places you in an association or a group with another, with another whole cohort of people, or and you'll never know if you're being targeted or persistently served with alcohol advertising every Friday night when you've got a drinking problem. So it's that thing about scale across the population and over time.
Charmaine?
I think in searching for the Venn diagram of what's great for brands and advertisers and what's great for the work that you do and citizens as a whole, I think the thing that was quite shocking to me was the ad sequences that Lauren was talking about. So where you're served multiple different category advertising in the same burst. So from an advertiser perspective, that's really bad planning because it's in such a cluttered environment, right? But it's also terrible for the actual person that's receiving such a volume of those ads as well. So in traditional broadcast media, you would never get that same category clutter. So, Channel 9's never going to place you with 3 or 4 or 5 of your competitors back to back and call that sort of an effective ad placement for you as well. So I think that looking at caps on, that it's not 100% alcohol advertising, maybe that's capped at 20%, or maybe that's, there's harmful advertising that's, particular categories that should be capped as well. But there is a meeting of the interests of the advertiser for that volume of clutter, for the effectiveness of that ad, but also, the citizen that's actually receiving that volume as well.
Right. We're almost at time, but we did start a couple of minutes late, so I'm gonna take a little bit of I've been given the all clear on that. That's good. So I'm gonna go with a couple of upvoted questions here. I'm gonna go firstly with a question from Casey, which is political advertising also tilting back in the direction of focusing on reach and brand marketing and becoming less hyper targeted? Does anyone have a Richard? I'll go to you on this one.
Do a bit of work in political advertising for one of the major parties, and it's not. There's still a very kind of targeted approach, and there is reasons for that, obviously, in terms of certain messages only being relevant in certain electorates and wanting to be really targeted about that. It's definitely not happening at the scale and sophistication that we've seen historically. But there is definitely a very targeted approach, and it's the last few, I guess, state elections that we've seen around the country. There's probably been some really, without saying too much, some really significant shifts in the way that advertising's been bought to be probably a bit smarter than it has been in the past.
Right. Can I go to this kind of came up briefly as we were going along, but in Australia we have the Privacy Act review, which is part of a larger set of international developments around privacy law and regulation, and it recommended a legal right to opt out of targeted ads. To what extent is this being discussed, and to what extent would it impact the industry if we went that way?
To opt out or opt in.
Opt
that's
out.
The thing, right? Because it's whether
they're saying opt out.
They're saying opt out because that's actually the current model. So as far as I know, you can. I mean, we give the walled gardens a hard time, but if you look at the privacy choices you have within some of the major players, it's actually exceptional. You can see the companies that upload you as part of their custom audiences and opt out of those. You can control what you will or won't want to see. I mean, it's an effort. I'm not saying that it isn't, but there are controls in there in the current situation, as far as I know, is opt out. And whilst it's not as clear as it could be, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's part of the work that we need to do to actually make it more, to give the consumers more control and awareness around what they've got, and then adhere to those preference and act more responsibly.
Charmaine, I might go to you on this question because it picks up a little bit on the observation you made about Lauren's, that sequence of alcohol ads. Like, it's from an advertiser point of view, that's not a good that's a cluttered placement. And there's a question here that I think goes along along those lines around the relationship between advertisers and platforms, and it's pointing to some of the historically issues we've seen around, Facebook having to report, faulty video metrics a few years ago, and YouTube having similar issues. And to what extent has that really affected trust between the industry and platforms, and where does that sit in terms of, advertisers trusting and feeling like they have a good capacity to control their placements and understand the metrics and feedback they're getting from platforms?
It was there was a strange period of time where digital was really ramping up, but a lot of people were still in traditional, and there was such a stark contrast between the reach metrics that you would get from broadcasters and traditional media and digital media as well. And so it's sort of night and day in terms of what you could see and how it was reported. I think for me personally, I didn't feel huge amounts of blowback on the kind of trust implications of that, because you're looking at the data that I can see on these platforms versus 17 other different platforms that I can get as well. And yes, there was a blip there. Yes, there was an issue there, but can I still get more visibility and more data there than I can across maybe 10 of the other platforms that I'm looking at? Yes. So for me personally, it didn't have a huge impact on the trust and the efficacy of the platforms as well. But, it did make people sit up and take a lot of notice, and it was looked at for a long period of time. I feel like you might have.
Yeah. I mean, the big part of the issue there was brand safety, right? The lack of control around where the appropriate contextual environments that your brand was potentially playing in. There's been a lot of maturity as a result, and looking more towards inclusion lists versus exclusion lists, or just leveraging better technologies to ensure that your brand is in the place that you're happy to see it, depending upon your appetite for risk. And that varies. All different brands and agencies have their own media quality approaches, but the capabilities there, I think, have massively improved. And that is another risk of what could happen with AI too, in terms of figuring that out. Because it was interesting when we went through the process as an industry body, and I think at the time I was on the board and working at a brand that was buying and selling, was actually the lack of companies and brands that are actually even quite large ones that had stood back and gone, what is our approach to media quality, and what is our level of appetite for risk that we're prepared to accept? It's quite amazing, really.
Okay, one more question, because there's two questions and they're getting upvoted a lot here. They're the same kind of question, which is, to what extent are some of the ethical issues that have been raised today discussed within, ad land, within the industry, be it greenwashing or more broadly uses of data and so on? So, what kind of discussions about advertising ethics and responsibility are kind of going on, are really lively in the industry?
From my perspective, probably not enough or as much as they should be. For a general statement, advertisers want to do the right thing, but aren't necessarily well informed about how to do the right thing, or where they might be, making mistakes and potentially making mistakes. Particularly when thinking about audiences, the data that they share, things like how profiling an audience for your customers could be profiling addiction, and then creating a lookalike audience on people that are likely to be addicted and maybe aren't even addicted yet, and it's just a real ethical pitfall, right? And I can tell you that there's not, from a marketer perspective, there's not a huge amount of thought going into that. There's much more focus on other things. Yeah, but it probably needs to, from my perspective, needs to be more than it is.
Can I jump in quickly? Because actually there is a lot, if you can lean in, I'm not saying that you're not necessarily, but there is right now a response required to a data ethics in AI piece of work that I know we're preparing a response for. There has been a response to some of the gambling topics that have come up. That's something that we've put together a collaborative response to. If you look at the work in and around data, ACCC this week, a request around more information on data brokerages, which is going to be less operational than the Attorney General's submission requests for the potential policy changes there, but this is all part of being able to lean in, and I suppose that's a lot of what we do naturally. So that it depends, I suppose, how much resource and time you have to be able to commit to those collaborative efforts that are happening pan-industry. But I think there's a lot of engagement there. I suppose it's a question of what that ends up looking like, admittedly, and it needs to be a representative group that's responding to that, not just sort of publisher heavy or buyer heavy or whatever.
Thank you, Jonas. We are out of time. So I want to thank Jonas, Richard, Jean, Charmaine, and Christine, Cesar, Lauren for this morning's panel. Thank you all.